Good to go.
Yeah.
Thank you. Well, we're going to have a little intermission and transmission. Councillor Woodcock has just noted something. He tells me that he was trying to rattle through his laptop to draw our attention when we were at this part of the agenda, but couldn't quite, what's the term, scroll, couldn't quite scroll quick enough. And I too put in my apologies for not picking the issue up, and it's on page 8 of your documentation, and on page 8, item C5, that the first resolution there is that we adopt the draft Carterton and South Wairarapa interim speed management plan, and it's my firm recollection that we did not adopt it. Councillor Woodhouse agrees. What's the appropriate procedural step here, please, Mr. Chief Executive?
So it is to amend the minute to reflect the conversation that occurred.
Right. So I will move that we do amend recommendation 1 on page 8 to reflect the conversation. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Woodhouse, any comments?
I'm sorry, Your Worship, I'm a little bit confused about we're going back here and I just don't.
All right, my apologies.
Yeah.
So we're on page 8.
Sorry,
No,
I'm on
Stella,
so
Oh,
So that resolution was actually withdrawn.
right, but it
so-
looks there as if it was carried.
Yeah. So
It was, what was carried was the motion to withdraw it.
Yeah.
That's what was carried.
I'm still a little confused. We page 8. What's it on, Stella?
That's
On the
the
minutes.
minutes are.
Oh, sorry, in the minutes. Yeah, minutes for yeah.
so if we change the word on paragraph 1 from adopt to withdraw, that reflects the note at the bottom, just makes it clear. Withdrew the draft Carterton South and interim speed management reviews for consultation occasion.
So what I recall is that the motion was moved, seconded, it was carried, and then it was you asked for motion to withdraw it, and Councillor Macaulay withdrew it. There was no further resolution to confirm that it was withdrawn, or else I would have written that. But I can go back to the
I'm pretty confident.
I'm pretty sure we did not. We agreed to have it presented, but we didn't adopt it. And everything else in the minutes there says we didn't adopt it.
So all in favour of the amendment, please say aye. Right, so let's get back now to the order of business, which is item C1. And let me just get there. Which page is that?
53.
Well done, Woody. Right.
What page is that?
53. So the purpose of the paper is to have the council approve financial contributions and financial compensation for Westec Developments for the testing of the lineal reserve, being the amount of $567,000 plus a bit extra plus GST. And who would like to introduce and discuss?
I'll give some introductory comments on this. So just first of all, I just want you to note that this was a decision made not even by the previous council. It was the council before this. And the council at that time wanted to make sure that development allowed suitable public amenity, pedestrian space, so that it set some guidelines around what we would call a structure plan for this particular development as a private plan change to make those things occur. So a developer was then put in place to develop the site, which included the public amenity and public space. So the basic idea and the legal requirement that occurs in this is that if the council requires land, then it is vested in council, becomes actually a council asset. Okay, so the value of this land will sit on the council's balance sheet as land the council owns, right? So that's an important thing to note. So the issue here is that the amount or the value of that land exceeds the amount of the financial contributions. So council is obliged, if it is requiring the land to be taken, i.e. is not able to be developed, then there is a cost to council for paying compensation to the developer for the value of that land, right? And so, and I do apologise in this sense, because this should have been dealt with at the time, not at this point, because the value of the land would have been so much less than it is now. And unfortunately, through those periods of time, we had changes of our planning managers. One left, we had another sadly and tragically died on the level crossing. And so James has done good work actually picking this up. And so it is something we should have, this council should have made a decision on quite some time ago, which of course made the cost of the compensation greater than it should have been. But in terms of the decision, I'm sure there's lots of questions about how structure plans are done and what the role of the commissioner is in terms of making decisions, setting conditions. But the basic council direction at the time was to make sure that there was a level of amenity, pedestrianisation inside the development, and land be set aside from development to allow that to occur, which means that the developer is entitled to compensation for it. So that's the summary of the paper. James, would you like to speak to it anymore, or do council want to ask questions to James?
I think you've covered it through, Mr. Chair, through quite something straightforwardly. Questions I will be able to ask.
I'll start with Councillor Olds because he was quicker than me.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, and
Do you want to come to the
thank you, Your Worship, and thank you, Harry, for that explanation, because I was on the council at the time, of course, when we endorsed the Greytown Development Plan, and council endorsed it on the recommendations of the commissioner who was appointed at the time to allow that plan and his recommendations at the time. And I can't recall the date, but I do recall the conversation at the time. So I guess that's all I can say from a historical point of view. Yeah.
Well, my question is completely factual. So in this process, the developer starts off with a lot of land and agrees with the conditions that he will pass over some of it to the council at some point and we will compensate. I'm looking at the map on page 68 because I think it is probably the most, shall we say, top-down map I've got, but it doesn't show me which is the land that we are talking about here, please.
So, to describe the picture, I would say if you look at the A line that's over A,
Yes.
and there will be some text, Greytown Development Area. My understanding is that the land would be approximately where that splits through the middle of that site. I think the rest of that land will be orchards. So the lands, this section of development, essentially developed will be Greytown Development Area. The consents that this covers up to that point.
So just to be a bit more specific, alongside the A, both to the left and the right, there are two dashes. And if you come up a third of the way, there are two more blue dashes.
So the top dash is my apologies. You didn't look at the bottom one, but right where the location is, didn't look down.
Okay.
But
No, that's fine.
the northern ones.
And then a little bit sort of 2/3 of the way up, starting from the West Street end, there are two more dashes. And finally, we come at I suppose you would say the northwest to Mole Street, and there are two more dashes there. Now, is everything between those two, 1, 2, 3, 4 sets of dashes? Is that
The
what?
middle section, I would describe it as. So where it says the red corridor here.
Yeah.
For the next most northerly set of dashes is the general area to which these proposals relate, both left and right hand side of
Yeah.
what is essentially the indicative collector road.
The orchards show.
No, is the short answer. Essentially, the orchards are held by a different landowner, and they haven't got consent of this attached to.
Okay. So heading to, so are you saying that the section up at Mole Street is not covered by what we're talking about?
No.
Oh, okay. So where do we come back to?
As I say, that middle section is probably the best way to describe it. So it looks like a P, I guess. It's that section of land through here.
Gotcha. Thank you. Any other? Yes, councillor.
Yeah, I was just wondering, given that it wasn't, that that's been picked up subsequent to the long-term plan and the annual plan and so on, none of the money here has been budgeted for. Is this going to be loan funded or is this coming out of reserves? And if so, do we have?
Sorry, through the chair, I can answer that. So the intention was, obviously, when this area develops, they pay reserves contribution. So it adds up to that account, the intention that has been signalled certainly through the plan change information that's embedded in the district plan is that the funding for it comes from the reserve. That's the purpose. And you'll note that in conjunction with Charlie, we've gone through that account and indicated the balances. So that's referenced in there. But no, certainly it's in the reserves fund. It just essentially it wasn't included as noted in the report in the LTP as a project that we would have counted it against, even though it was clearly anticipated. Hence the need to come here and get a resolution.
So just to clarify, they've paid money and we're effectively refunding money.
So the value of the works that
Plus the value increase.
So essentially we're offsetting the amount of what they would have paid for reserves plus cash.
Through you, your worship, James, the valuation for the land in question, was that a valuation that was prompted by council and we sought the valuation of that, or was that by the developer who sought? And I guess my question is, how accurate is that valuation in terms of open and transparent?
Yeah, so through the chair, normal practice would be a peer review of that, but we just recently, and I say very recently, within a few months, undertaken a similar valuation process, and our observation was that the numbers were essentially the same. So we had every confidence that the amounts that we were looking at, the valuations were fairly robust.
Thank you.
Sorry, through you, Mr. Chief. James, is this situation where the developer's contribution is less than so we're paying them? Is this a standard? Is this a normal situation that we would find ourselves in with developments, or is this unusual?
I would say it's usual but infrequent. That's probably fair to say. It depends on the nature of the development and what we have required in terms of a works contribution and whether that has a wider benefit than just the need for the site. So as I say, it's not, we don't do it frequently, but it is a normal part of practice.
Well,
So
sorry, I'll go to councillor Evans. Okay.
Thank you, through you, your worship. Further down in the paper and the documents you provide to us, page 66, para C, and that's under the appendix 15 of the Greytown Development Area Situation Plan that was signed in 2018. So paragraph C refers to reserves. 3% of the land value of each allotment created plus GST, and then I'll follow the last sentence. The yield of the reserves contributions from 3% of the land value of the 400 additional lots in the Greytown development area is considered sufficient to enable council to establish the lineal reserve as envisaged. Is that so? In 2000, and I imagine that costs have increased northward significantly since 2000 and and 18. Is that sentence still valid? Or would that be still?
Through the chair, look, it's, yes and no, the development cycle is potentially a long one. I don't want to overcomplicate my answer, but the development potential is a long one. Essentially, that 3% is calculated once we receive an application for what we call a completion certificate. So all the works are paid, all the works are undertaken, any fees are paid, and then they go away and they apply for a club in New Zealand. So what that means is that, so if there's variations of land value over that period, it should be captured generally at that back end. So because it's a percentage value that we take. It's the most recent valuation before we give approval. Now that also depends on when we receive the vested works. So there's not necessarily an easy way to stitch them all together. I think it's a best estimate of how much that work will cost at what particular time. We have obviously little or no control over value of land, and so it can be a difficult process to kind of hit a target. All we can do is identify generally what that amount will be at the time of the work, and ideally put it in, well, no, we need to put it in the LTP, and we should be able to adjust those figures as we need to as we move through LTP cycles. So it would be appropriate time to review, if there has been significant changes, review how much that project will actually cost us, and change things accordingly.
Okay, so here's the thing that worries me the most. Vesting is a somewhat old-fashioned term, so we become the owner. And therefore, as the owner, we presumably now take on some responsibilities for the state of the land. Am I correct in saying yes? So when I look, for example, at page 70, which is cross-section 1 of the structure plan, what I see there is a water race with bumps, which are the raised areas that you can now plant attractively. I see a swale, which I'm absolutely all in favour of. And when I turn over to page 72, I get an artist's impression of what the soakage swale, the water race, and the planted water race bank might look like. And at the moment, that area looks nothing like that at all. The water race looks like a filthy grey. I do not see a swale. I do not see attractive plantings either side of the water race. And so my question is, when we become the owner, are we now responsible for the costs of doing that work?
Mr. Chair, I have been having discussions with Mr. O'Connor, the chair, the Parks Reserves Manager. Forgive me if I've got this title wrong, asset. We have noted that in the structure plan, specifically the planting is the cost of planting will be undertaken by council through the reserves reserve. So the planting of the trees is for council's responsibility at a particular time. So that was envisaged. The water race, my interpretation of the process, there's nothing that actually sets aside specific detail in terms of its composition, other than it's to be the key factor in the structure plan is its movement to enable further development. I'm not sure, I'm not seeing anything that requires significant beautification for that structure. The swales, probably not fully over that issue, Mr. Chair. I think that there's quite a lot of green space in that area that will act as a swale. I don't believe there are any undulations. The works are required to have design approvals by our roading and water services engineers prior to construction. I suspect that those were done a long time ago as well. And the reference would have been to that structure plan. So I can't give more of an answer than that right now, I'm afraid to.
Thank you. So the cost of the plantings, is that part of the bill we're looking for here?
No.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Sorry, through you, Mr. Chair. I have some concern that there are many things, many projects that we will require money for and therefore will become the burden of our ratepayers. I am concerned that there are developments such as this that we then end up paying for, and by we, I mean our ratepayers. It just concerns me that not only do we now have a bill rather than a contribution from developers, but not only are we going to pay for this, we also purchase it essentially unfinished and with the burden of further cost, which will be paid for by our ratepayers. And I wonder what the process moving forward is. I mean, this is done, Reading Street is done, but what the process going forward is to make sure that these developments don't actually become a cost burden to our ratepayers.
So, Mr. Chair, look, I'd like to clarify, there is no ratepayer funding to this. This is out of infrastructure, the reserves reserve are just paid from financial contributions. So this is developers' impact paying for this. There are operational costs, obviously, in terms of buying and looking after it, but this is not funded by rates. And in terms of growth funded or infrastructure required for growth, that's where the funding comes from for that purpose. The process of this one is not probably ideal with the benefit of hindsight, but similarly, there will be costs involved, and we will be having discussions involved in enabling development that we so desperately need, and understanding things like where are our levels of service currently, how much can we charge to a developer, how much can we afford. So those discussions will be talked about later on.
Councillor Clifford.
Yeah, just carrying on from that, a lot of those, the financial contributions are contained in the district plans, which are, it's 10 years old. And so that is one of the topics that the district plan review is looking at when we get the financial chapters coming into it. It's a live topic right now. I would also say, James, tell me if I'm wrong, but we as a council in our planning for our town decided that we wanted this thing down this way. So actually the problem is around the table here. This is what we asked for. And so it's now come back. Right. So we make the rules here, not the developer.
No,
so it is on us.
Yeah.
And that's what our spatial plan is all about, is the detailed planning about what our development rate is going to look like. But I just wanted to raise one little plan, and the picture that you brought up on page 60, 70 really highlights the man. And Woody and I were over there the other day, and when you look at the water race, it's probably over a metre deep, wouldn't it, from the edge?
Metre anyway, yeah.
And if I had one of those on my property, I would be required to fence it from a safety perspective.
Only where you're carrying stock.
Sorry?
Only for
No, but in terms of safety, it's a water hazard for kids, and this is in a neighbourhood. And not only that, the drains are completely open. And you just go, this is just a disaster waiting to happen. And we need to actually have a little bit more think about how we're doing this, particularly given that our towns all have water races going through them and open drains, culverts and things. And in this new development, we're just looking at it, a little kid falling there into the culvert. You'd never find them. Particularly on one part, it's completely buried for 50 metres. So,
If you do find them, they'll be very green.
yeah, so I just think we just need to think a little bit about how we're doing this and what some of the protections we're putting in place for our community.
So just through you, Your Worship, yeah, and comment to what's your name again? Yeah, Alistair's view on things. I guess that we'd have to look at that in a long-term strategy right across the district, because there are open waterways here, there, and everywhere. Sure, this is a built-up urban area, and maybe that's something that that can come up in the Wairarapa Combined District Plan in its current review. And I guess it's been part of the conversation, has it, James?
Yes and no, through you, Mr. Chair. So in terms of compelling people to do things, the Combined District Plan is probably not the right mechanism. There are bylaws, waterways bylaws, which are probably more appropriate, I would think. in terms of, just I'll quickly outline why this resource management essentially permits existing uses, particularly for territorial authorities. So where the regional councils can say, actually, you've got a rule now, you have to do something for many instances, we can sort of say, well, unless you're doing something different, we can't actually enforce the rule.
Right.
So that probably prevents requiring people to, say, fence them off, etc., etc. So there's a lot of matters covered in the bylaws that might be
Or appropriate.
It may not require fencing, but it certainly requires some child protection covers over the culverts.
Yeah, I absolutely endorse that. I'll come and then to you.
Sorry, my understanding of this particular water race culvert drain situation is that it's very sort of concrete straight up and down, quite deep, like but quite sheer though, rather than the sort of traditional sweep of a culvert and other.
Well, I just have another.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair, through you. Firstly, thanks, James, for coming. I know this has been lumbered on you because it's nothing to do with you. You come well after this. So I appreciate you getting up here and answering all our questions. As far as the water race thing goes, Alistair made a good point. Maybe there should be a grate on the end of that culvert. And my personal views is we should be looking at in these developments to have these things piped at the developer's cost, rather than having them left for the ratepayer to pay to clean them all the time and maintain them. Anyway, this question is for you, James. Should we have a thing set in place that subdivisions and developments can't start until all this stuff is finalised? Because this is like, if we end up with this every time a subdivision goes in, we're going to be in the right state.
Yeah, through Mr. Chair, look, as I think I've noted, the normal process course of events where we have investment associated with development, is that it is explicitly provided. I mean, it is provided for, that's why we have the reserves reserve. The issue that we have today is the fact that it wasn't included as a project against that reserve in the LTP. In terms of the process, similarly, my understanding anecdotally is that there was some discussions through the consenting process 2017, 2018 around when would be the most suitable time to receive that. Hindsight is wonderful, but essentially, you know, we've got to match our reserves with their ability to compensate. I think perhaps there are some areas that aren't particularly clear in terms of what council's expectation was in terms of who the public is around the nature of formation of that water race. I mean, it's not, so to compare it with Harrison Street, it's not like Harrison Street, it's much shallower than Harrison Street. But there is some dissatisfaction and disconnect between perhaps what some of the purchases were sold and essentially water race was going to be in. That was, yeah.
Okay, so I want to just sort of wrap this up now. I think we've all had the chance to have multiple opportunities to talk. But I am conscious that Councillor Bosley, who is possibly the person who lives the closest to this particular development, has not yet expressed a view, and I want to make sure that he has had the opportunity before we move on.
Yeah, I'm happy with the discussions as so far with what's outlined here. Yeah. I think Melissa's covered any questions that I'm going to ask as well. So yeah, I'm comfortable with where things are at.
A final observation?
Just two quick things. One, does this mean, is this going to happen in if that orchard ever sells, which is at the moment it's unlikely in the near future, are we going to end up with the same problem in the next stage?
Mr. Chair, look, the answer is I don't know. That's an area that we've identified, well, that I've identified with our finance team to have a discussion about, particularly going into the LTP next year to understand whether we need to keep that in mind. It's a challenging one, given that the indications are it's not in the short term. So where do we put it in the LTP, for example? Secondly, I need to understand whether that's also required, leaving reserve is also required over that land. I think that's the case, but I can't give you a certain answer to that, councillor, I'm afraid.
Thank you.
Just one quick, if I can get this thing to open up again. On page 64, under 4.2 reserves provision, is number 2, the lineal reserve shall be developed with facilities and amenities, including a cycleway and walking path, which it has, plantings of native and exotic plants and trees in accordance with the regional native planting guide, which it hasn't, and space seating and lighting, which I'm pretty sure isn't there either. Were they supposed, should have it been signed off without those there, or?
Through the chair, look, it hasn't been signed off. They are requirements of those resource consents. The chairs, as I say, and if you read further in there, the planting is actually identified as being something that we would do. But in terms of the chairs, etc., they don't appear to be part of any design approval or department of the resource considering.
Thank you, councillor Maynard.
I was just wondering that, when you were talking about the, like where would something like the orchards in the long term, or where would it fit? Is that something that could possibly go into the spatial plan? So while that's being looked at with by the stuff right up the council, and while it's on the table, perhaps if it was there, so it's noted, and it won't suddenly rear its head.
Yeah.
No, it's something that, a space that we know that if it was to come up anytime in the future, it's there, it's being overseen.
So through the chair, look, it's residential. It's residentially zoned currently, and included in the spatial plan as such.
Okay.
The complexity of it is that, without going into details that aren't mine, that there is no immediate plan to undertake a subdivision of that land. So when it comes to identifying that project in a long-term plan, what year do we put it in?
Yeah.
How does that help us out? So that's part. I don't have an answer for that either.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, I'm going to just wrap up at this stage and come to a vote. I would comment that I think papers of this ilk do need to address all of the costs that council might be confronted with as a result of their decision. I'm also concerned that people may have looked at some of the diagrams earlier on in their purchasing history and seen pictures like page 70, page 71, and expect that that's what they were going to get because that's what council would require. And I think it would be very fair of some of them to come back and ask, what is council actually going to do to give life to that? Which then brings us to the point that if these documents in fact represent an artist's impression rather than the actual thing that we are talking about, what is the consent requirement? And I don't think we're particularly in a good position to discuss it, because certainly a couple of times I've raised issues concerned with what I understood was the plan, only to be told what they probably were part of the consent. So potentially we would have saved a little bit of time if we'd had more relevant documentation, in my view. And I think the third thing that has come up from the conversation is that this particular structure ends up as a safety hazard to children for several reasons, actually. There are other parts of the water race that are also, I think, equally concerning. And I just give notice that I'll put a paper to the next infrastructure committee that we get a report on the overall safety, because I think, picking up Councillor Holden's point, that we are getting away with a much lesser safety standard than a person having it through their backyard, etc. So anyway, we'll come back to that. And if we return to page 53, where we have recommendations under paragraph 2, there are 2 recommendations there. I will move that we accept them. Do we have a seconder, please? We do, Councillor Olds. Is there any further discussion related solely to the recommendation. So it's none, I shall put it. All those in favour that the two recommendations be agreed with, please say aye. Aye. Against, no. It's carried.
Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And thank you very much for your advice. I personally learned a lot, but so I thank you for that. So we now come to item C2, which
2112.
thank you. So revocation, that's a hard word to say, of the Wairarapa Consolidated Bylaw 219, Part 11, speed. I'll invite the Chief Executive to make some words.
Thank you. So the law has changed in the way that councils and Whakatahi really set speeds. Prior to the law changing, the process for setting of speed was made by a consolidated bylaw. So that is now effectively redundant. We cannot exercise that bylaw in terms of setting a speed. And so this paper essentially is to clean the books, to revoke a redundant process because the law has changed. It is literally as simple as that.
So can I invite, yes, Councillor Later.
So Harry, we've been waiting for a wee while for you. Harry, we were waiting about, going railroading, putting speed limits or signs up just to make sure. Is this still going to be moving? Sorry, or do we have to wait for Whakakote to tell us that people can go 100 k's on the gravel road?
No, so that was the discussion that we had previously about the minutes. So we are initiating a speed review, and you weren't happy with the original proposal and requested us to work with Carter and Marston to find and gave us some very strong feedback on what the form of that speed review should look like. And we are the officers are working through that then to bring that back to you. Yeah, so the speed review is happening. You didn't like the original context for it, and so we've gone away and done further work and we're lining ourselves up, particularly with Carsten and hopefully with Marston.
Councillor Rolls.
So we're on it.
Sorry, no time frame.
Yes, yeah. Stephen, when do we anticipate bringing the next iteration of the speed review back to council or the Infrastructure Services Committee?
I would hope that it will be by the next council meeting.
Yes, yeah. I just had that concern with rural roading, and I think that's followed up in general our district. With our huge rural area, we have to, be looking sooner rather than later at how we manage those roads.
So through you, Mr. Chair, to Harry, I guess, is that one of the reasons that the consolidated bylaw was set up was to maintain a consistency across our three regions in terms of speed and speed limit. Does revoking this this bylaw restrict our ability to impose speed limits on our rural roads in the first instance, and particularly in areas where we have some identified hazard danger areas? So does it restrict us to do that?
No, revoking does not restrict us. We can't legally, we can't set a speed other than through the new legal process. So
it takes our ability away to be able to set speed limits within our rural area.
We just have to use a different process.
Just change it.
Changing a process.
There's a different process.
So yes, different process, but our ability as a council, for instance, to make those changes still remains. Is that?
Yes.
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's a very good point to clarify. Councillors, any more to say? Then it's not okay. Councillor Elam.
Thanks for that rundown, Harry, and just reading through that information. Just going back over the last 3 years, the Martinborough Community Board has certainly been asking questions a number of times about the ability to review speed limits around Martinborough with the use of cyclists going to and from vineyards, people walking to and from vineyards, and the conflict between pedestrians, cyclists and cars. And during each time we asked those, the community board was asking those questions, we were told that we would have to await until Kotahi's work on speed reviews had been done. However, with that speed bylaw in place in the last 3 years, was there the ability for council to have changed speed limits? Because I see that late last year, September, October, Carlton District Council had changed speed limits on rural roads at intersections where there had been high accident rates. And so presumably if it's a combined district bylaw, if Carlton Council, another district was able to change their speed limits, could we have done that previously?
I mean, the answer is we could do that up to the 19th of May 2022. But the staff advice was to do it once and do it properly and be consistent across the entire district. And that was the decisions of the previous council, was to support that.
I'd like to add to that, that at the last council meeting when we said we didn't like the paper that was presented, if you remember, I said that under the previous council there was a working group with Carterton, of which I was on and Pam was on, and Tim, with the representatives from here for the speed review. The council decision had said we would do it once and do it across both areas, but we were limited. We made a decision pretty early on that we wouldn't progress it until we knew what the outcome of Waka Kotahi's decision was going to be, because it would seem to be very pointless if they made a decision and then we had something that wasn't compatible with that, and we'd have all sorts of confusion across the network, which is exactly where we are now. Of course, when you've got state highway at 80 and you've got local roads for 100, so that's the situation we're in at the moment. But we don't want to do it haphazardly, because otherwise you'll end up with even more confusion. And if you think about driving from here to Marston, I think there's 26 speed changes. So we don't want to get into that situation with our local roads, which will actually increase the dangers, not actually make it better.
Thank Councillor Wood. That's it. Yeah, Woodcock, sorry.
Yeah, my thoughts on the revoking of bylaws, we should actually just hold off and wait and do a combined thing at the same time as all the other councils. If we're looking into a whole speed review and everything with them.
Councillor Hall.
So I'm a great believer in having local solutions for local problems, and my concern I picked up on what Alistair said in terms of waiting for Waka Kotahi to come back with their view on the world, and we know their view on the world at the moment. It's road to zero and 80 k's between Featherston and Masterton. So we know their view on the world, and I have to say personally, I'm against, I guess, being dictated to by a government agency, for instance, who has probably little knowledge of our rural road network. And I'd rely on our officers, for instance, who have intimate knowledge of our rural road network to give us guidance in this area. And I don't want us to lose that ability.
I just draw everybody's attention to, this is page 112, paragraph 2E, which tells us that the Carlton is considering this in a week's time, and if we both play the game of waiting until the other does something, we won't get very far. So possibly we might be the front-footed people here. But I think the real issue comes down to something the Chief Executive said very, very early on. We have a bylaw that's now been rendered completely moot by a change in the law. So why are we going to keep it on our books? There's probably a few others we should get rid of at the same time.
I think you should also note, Mr. Mayor, that our decision doesn't become valid until Carterton makes the same decision, because it's a combined bylaw. So it's just a timing issue that our council meeting happens to be before this.
Yes, thank you.
And this in no way changes our ability to move forward with the speed management review that we're doing. It's just simply changing one way of doing that for the new way of doing that, because by law, this way no longer is relevant.
So I'll just check that there's nobody who wishes to say anything. Well, in that case, I will move that we adopt all of recommendation as under the second, all the recommendations under paragraph 2 on page 112. Councillor Plummer, thank you. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Yes. Okay, that's done. And I think we now come, we're actually getting ahead of time. I think this is exciting. And we're about to speed up because we're coming to the Greytown wheels.
So we can't speed up because the road won't let us, so. Slow down and I'll be overtaking the wall on my bicycle before you know it.
So,
I won't be governed by it.
so we're talking about page 60. And the Councillor Plummer tells me that this particular subject has been on the agenda for about 20 years.
It's not quite, not quite. That's an exaggeration.
Dennis phrased it about 20 years ago. That's where the thing
That's
started.
baby.
Well, no, it's actually Deb's, but it's, I did resolve to
Your passion.
finish it.
So this in a sense, I think, is a momentous moment and something to be celebrated. I actually suggested to Councillor Plummer that when we finally get to the end of it, maybe we should name it the Plymouth Park. I think it's good.
Pretty much like those-
Really say no. Some of the steps.
Mateo?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what I'm going to do is to invite Councillor Plummer to move the recommendation. So wishes. Yeah, absolutely does. And do we have a seconder from Greytown?
Have great.
Yes, we do, Councillor Bosley. And well, the time is yours, Councillor.
Well, this is procedural more than anything else because the delegation, the approval for building of the park and so on and so forth has already been done and consulted. So this is purely procedural to allow Harry to sign the contract. And that's all it is. It's not revisiting the discussion about the park. It's not revisiting what goes in the park or anything. It's purely and simply so Harry can sign the contract so that we can get the diggers into it.
Thank you. I'll just check whether the seconder to the motion wishes to add anything. No.
So through you, Your Worship, I have a question for Mr. Plummer. And in terms of community fundraising for, our contribution is $1 million. The community have obviously agreed, and I'd imagine they would have done that, to raise a further $2 million for this whole project. And as you say, this has been going on for a considerable amount of time. So I'd imagine that would have been a considerable amount of fundraising done by the community to get to this level. So
Not yet, and there's a reason for that because we didn't know what we were building. So the $3 million that is floated around is very much an estimate. And the park is going to be built effectively stages. This first tranche, for want of a better term, it will be built for but not with. So a lot of the things will be in there. For example, the basketball court, the pump track, the hard items will be in there. The park will be ready to add in items, which will be where the community funding comes in. But the park will be fully operational at the end of stage 1. So stage 2 will be adding more stuff into the already developed park, if that makes sense. So that's why I use the term built for but not with.
So just to add to that, we as council are endorsing $1 million worth of spend onto a project that has no, I guess there's a plan, I guess. So I guess my question to you is what if the wheels fall off this thing? Excuse the pun.
Well, at the end of this first stage,
And Aaron, it's probably made.
at the end of the first stage, it's fully operational. It will be able to be used.
So our $1 million will pay for the first stage.
Yes. Yeah, that's the aim. That's the aim that should happen.
So when is the additional funding being done? Because the idea was that 1 million was going towards the additional 2 million to build something.
It wasn't. No,
It was,
no, it wasn't.
the
Original stuff.
it was going to be
The original plan was $1 million towards the park, and the community said, we will raise $2 million to add extras on. So the plan has been designed around a structured approach to building this so that and I use the term again, built for but not with. And the with part is the community parts to add in things like the climbing tower and the more park things. The pump and cycle part gets built as part of stage one.
Thank you, councillor.
James, correct?
Mr. Mayor, just to check on this other funding that's to be raised, I mean, is there a plan for it? Have various groups fought out their hands for certain amounts of money for it? Or I mean,
No, because it hasn't got to that stage to ask to do that. We've actually been going through this process to get to where we are now. And as I said to you, it's taken about 20 years just to get to this point where council said yes 3 years ago, 4 years ago now, to putting this money in. And we're now 4 years down the track from that decision, or 3.5 years down the track from that decision. And we're now at the stage of signing the contract.
so theoretically, it could only be $1 million park.
Well,
Sounds like,
yeah.
yep.
Well, the $1 million park will still be a park that will be funded, but it's the extra stuff that it, and a lot of you probably haven't even seen the plan and what it looks like. So when you talk to these park developers, if you use Maidstone Park, for example, this is exactly how Maidstone Park was designed. And the community then goes in and then starts looking at the other things that they put in. And there's lots of organisations around the country that come to the party and say they'll buy climbing frames or these sorts of things that go in. But there's no point in doing that until we actually get to the stage where we've got the structure in place.
No, I see that, but in a way, this $1 million has been given on the basis that there's this other funding coming in from the community.
Yes, well, yes and no.
No?
Yeah.
Well, let the second.
So because the $1 million is giving us the need to haves, $2 million is the nice to haves.
Well, like I said, it's like building for, but not with say. So the whole park will be there, but it won't have the climbing frames and the
So we've got must have these things. We'd like to have these.
Yeah, so the community part is the extras, the things that make it into the beyond just the wheels park, I suppose. That's about right, isn't it, James?
Makes sense to me.
Councillor Wicker.
So my concerns are, Alistair, one, you sort of get $1 million figure thrown at you, which is in a 3 million. That's all just estimates and guesses. I've had a lot of locals in town tell me that site's contaminated. And there's been no testing done. And if that site is contaminated, it could cost a hell of a lot of money just to decontaminate it. I actually spoke to my wife the other night and said I wouldn't mind donating a digger to the community to do test holes when the time comes to save costs and a bit of a contribution to the community by us at no cost at all. So have you had any?
Yeah, I'm not sure that's really our area. That's very much getting into the operational side about how to build this. The community was consulted very widely on this 4 years ago, and it was about a 97% return on, and it was the biggest consultation that's ever been done in the history of South Africa. And it was so overwhelmingly unanimous to actually get this thing done. We're at the stage now of just allowing Harry to sign the contract to get on with it. So I'll answer all those very questions.
I'll pull forward. I'm just worried about the cost blowing out to the point where it doesn't actually become, $3 million is a hell of a lot of money to if we got to come up with another 2 million from the community, it's a hell of an ask.
What kind of contamination?
Well, it used to be the old gasworks site. So who would know what's in the ground?
If I might just invite one of the officers to comment on what I'm about to say. We're not going to allow people to skate park on earth or what is their requirement. We'll have them skate parking on. It'll be a combination, I suspect, of asphalt, concrete and other hard surfaces. And almost invariably that is laid over polythene, which has its own problems. But nevertheless, there is a very big clearance between whatever is contaminated and encapsulated in the flow. And it's very hard to see how somebody's going to have a problem with that, but is there somebody who can add to that comment?
We've certainly never had any concerns expressed to us that that land is contaminated. I'd have to defer to, but we just have not had that concern raised with us. We can check that. I'm absolutely confident that it would have been raised by now by someone in the community, just at this point.
Councillor Elam.
Through you, your worship, thank you. Harry, this is going to be another project which is a community-driven project, but also receiving council funding. When the Waihinga Centre here in Martinborough was envisaged and then constructed, there was a lessons learned project which occurred after that, after the Waihinga Centre was finished. Are the lessons that were learned from the Waihinga project going to be transferred over to this community-driven project in Greytown?
Oh, absolutely.
To ensure that the funding which is coming from council is accounted for and correctly managed.
I mean, one of the key recommendations that so design and build is actually a really important word here. So if you think of the Waihinga Centre, council made a certain amount available, and then the community raised, they got works in kind, they got donations to actually substitute it. So there's two ways you contract. You literally create a design and you give it to the contractor to then price the cost of building those things, and they will build that. Equally, design and build allows addition of additional features if the contract is underspent, so you can get more for your buck by doing that. And this is case in point. So they were able to add a number of features on inside the original concept, because that's what it is, not a hardwired drawing saying this is what it will look like. And so that's a really important part of this. So this allows innovation, creativity, people to make rather than just cash, diggers and all sorts of things the community want to do. So that was one of the key aspects of it, and that made this particular project really, really successful.
However, there were lessons to be learned, which need to be translated or transferred across.
I agree, but I'm just saying that was one of the critical aspects of that particular, it was a community partnership. That was actually a feature of the lessons learned.
I think it would be fair to say that this is not a community partnership, or at this point is it particularly a community project. It's a project the community have looked for a very long time. But in terms of the stage one, as Councillor Plymouth pointed out, this is a council project, council funded, and council will control the project. If something goes wrong, then it's our problem. But it won't. And one of the reasons it won't is that, going back to your lessons learned, every significant project needs to have a person, the elected members, who is a sponsor of the project. In the jargon, you have project sponsors who are people who care, who are keeping an oversight on as often as you need to. And I have asked Councillor Plummer, and he has consented, would he be our project sponsor on this project to make sure that the sort of things which can go wrong are being alerted to us ASAP, but hopefully to make sure, because he will be consulted as and informed as appropriate, that in fact nothing does go. And I'm very confident, as I say, that because he does care, and to a certain extent, he's put a lot of his political capital in a way into this project. There'll be nobody who wants it to succeed more. And I think, in fact, every project we do has to have somebody from amongst us who is keen to put in that little bit of extra time to make sure it's going as we expect it. And this is one of the things, not so much possibly we can learn from what happened with Waihanga, but certainly Carterton has had two expensive projects that cause a lot of comment. And in both cases, what we see happening is the elected people, the elected folk have just taken their eye off the ball. So we cannot afford to do that. And if it's important enough to spend $1 million on, it's important enough someone here to be playing the watchdog. And I'm confident that Councillor Plummer is as good as any of us to fulfill that role. Okay, so we've got the recommendation and we will proceed to it. Yes, sorry, yes, Councillor. Right.
Through you, Mr. Chair. I understand what you're saying about that this has all been discussed ad infinitum for a long time, and it clearly seems like it's something that is you're passionate about it, the community's passionate about it, and the potential for creating an amazing resource for the community is definitely there. But I'm just aware that the conversations around it have all happened before I got in this seat. So I'd like to take, if we've got the time, take the opportunity to just rapid fire ask a couple of questions around this. So first off, when you're saying the skate park's been talked about for 20 years, do you know who started the initial conversations? Was it from the community?
It was from the community. It was the Dennis family actually was the original people that brought this up when their kids were very little.
Montgomery, Rosie Montgomery. And
Rosie Montgomery and Deb Dennis, I think, were the two, were the
initiated
drivers of this.
Deb was definitely.
And their kids have now all left school.
Okay.
So it started a long time ago.
Somewhere else, yeah, great. Okay, and the 3 million, I understand it's a ballpark with, you know, us providing the seed money and then the community raising what they can. But that 3 million, has that kind of been roundly updated since we've had ridiculous price increases for everything?
No, it hasn't. It's one of the topics that I raised with the mayor this morning, actually, is that we made this decision nearly 4 years ago for the $1 million seed funding, and now we're now that value's probably only about 750,000 now. So it's probably a conversation we might have to come back to a little bit down the track.
Increasing that seed funding, okay. So we're not at this stage entirely confident that we could get that first tranche done for $1 million, or we're still pretty happy that that's...
It's certainly in the tender document, $1 million, wasn't it? So that's what's in the tender document.
Yeah. So that, okay, great. Okay, and then so the two more things that are probably going to go a little bit wide here. I'm aware that as a council we represent 3 towns. Are we sure that Greytown is the one that needs $1 million invested for community projects? And then the other thing is...
I'll answer that first. Yes, it is the only town without a park for teenagers or anything to do for teenagers or that. So we've got a park for little kids, but there is nothing there for sort of 8-9-year-olds up at all. And so certainly when I stood for election the first time, and I said this to the mayor this morning, as I walked around town, the single issue that every grandparent raised with me was that they have to leave Greytown to see their grandkids because the grandkids don't want to come and see them because there's nothing for them to do. So the other thing, of course, is that given where it is, proximity to Kurunui. Kurunui is our college that looks after all of South Wairarapa. These parks are frequented largely by probably first, second, third year kids at Kurunui. That's where it'll be used the most.
Okay, good. So are you saying in terms of what you're talking about, like because Featherstone has its own skate ramp, that's the Featherstone kids taken care of?
No, I just said that in Greytown there is nothing for that level of kids, but in the other cities there have been a lot of development of parks and things. There hasn't been any park development in Greytown for a long years.
Okay, cool. And then in terms of skate parks and their design, my understanding is it's a lot of concrete and hard surface. So if I put my Climate Change Committee Chair hat on for 2 seconds, are we sure that this project is going to align with our climate change strategy? How will we mitigate the stormwater runoff?
So James is probably better to talk about this, but in terms of the development of these parks, very similar to how Maidstone has been built. So if you have a look, have you been down to see Maidstone Park? Just in Upper Hutt. It's the same company building it, isn't it? Yeah. So if you go down there, whilst there's a lot of concrete underneath, on the surface it's rubber, or it's sort of it's a very futuristic sort of facility.
And Maidstone has a lot of planting. There's lots of, so that the pump track, but then there's lots of planting around it and then between it to mitigate that runoff.
Andrew, you might have something.
But now, we'll just make sure that all of councillors raised questions were answered.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing that I've put down, the other thing is that, are we still confident? And I think you probably actually have addressed this in that we build the first lot and then the rest happens organically as the community can. But are we still sure that our community has $2 million in the coffers to be able to contribute to it?
It's over the years.
I would like to think that Greytown should be able to raise that.
I should say firstly that if you like, the target population is growing quite considerably. So last week I went to an inauguration of a new block at primary school, for example. So it's a very extensive and big building. I don't think it's entirely accurate to describe what we're doing as seed funding. Seed funding usually implies we'll do this provided you are also doing something else. I think what we're doing here is much more, if you like, building a house for tenants. But if they want to come in and plant rose trees, that's fine. But they are getting a fully functioning facility right from the day that it opens. So I think that is quite a key point. Last year, just to come to your final question, last year a group that I belong to wanted to raise money to support Ukraine within a week without doing particularly much at all. We'd raised thousands of dollars. So there is quite a lot of goodwill and Greytown. It turns out that there are a number of quite a lot of people there.
And it's not just Greytown that'll do it. Like I said, there's organisations around the country that help development of these things and provide different pieces of equipment. So Sid Kempton is the community lead on this group, and he's well ingrained with the developer on this project, and the people building it actually get a lot.
Just go to the back row.
Stuff as well.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Chair. Just in response to some of those questions, Councillor Gray, that it's an LTP, so to change the LTP require change the LTP.
Yeah.
So that's just backing up. It's a decision that has been made and the funds have been committed.
Yeah.
And in response to ensuring that it meets the climate change aspirations of South Wairarapa District Council, our procurement policy make sure that we have social, economic and climate change aspects covered in our procurement exercise. So those things would have to be evaluated as part of the process.
Okay, thank you. Yes, Councillor Woodcock.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. The community funding is a little bit of a worry because I understand the soccer club are also about to do a massive rebuild of the club rooms and looking for also community funding in the millions of dollars. And then there's also other issues around other parks in town down the track as well. So that's the only sort of concern I have, Alistair, is getting that extra money for the extra, add-ons.
But as I said to you, that the money doesn't have to come up tomorrow.
Yeah.
It's going to be built for, but not with. So we can add, we could add these things over the next 5 or 10 years. It doesn't actually matter when we get them. It's just a continual adding and the equipment as it comes online and so on. So it's not like the park needs to be built tomorrow, and if the money's not there, the park does not work. So that's the beauty about it.
Also,
I'm just aware timing on this, and particularly in view of the fact that Amanda pointed out this is already committed in the LTP, and all we're being asked to do today is sign off on that $1 million or get, for the contract.
It's got these questions.
To refresh,
Even
absolutely.
I know this inside out, but not everyone else does. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it is undoubtedly one of the, what happens when you have a legacy project, but some people understand fully, but you've got a number of new people coming in. So look, I thank everybody for.
I'd like to say one other thing though, just so, that you probably don't realise is that when we started this project more recently, probably 3 years ago, the park design wasn't done by us. It was designed by the kids from Kuranui and the kids from Greytown School. And they came up and we had a meeting down by the dog park a long time ago now and said, what is it that you want in your park? And we took a whole list of all the stuff, and then it all went off to the guy, the company that got the contract, and they're really good because they do a lot. And they turned it into something that was actually quite good. Then it went back to the schools, and the schools said, oh, can we change? You know, the kids were really invested in it. And so the beauty about it is it's not our park, it's actually going to be their park. They want to do the murals. They want to make sure that there's facilities for where the parents can get a cup of coffee. You know, that was high on their list to say, our parents are going to take us to the park, what are they going to do? So little things like that was actually quite, you know, and then they came and presented our long-term plan and anything. Yeah, very passionate about it. So it is, it's driving, it's not so much.
Right, so that was the right of reply. We've got the on page 160. We've got 2 recommendations. Moved and seconded. All in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
And against? No, right. I guarantee that would be the most popular item of council business agreed to today. I trust that we will have a media statement shortly that highlights it. Thank you. So. You're on.
Yeah.
Run. The best thing to do with bad news is cover it up with. Not that we've had any bad news either. But we'll come last item before lunch, page 170, the triennial agreement. Now, this is something that requires, which is basically work with our neighbouring councils, including Greater Wellington Regional Council, to basically play nicely together, so that we agree that there are issues which affect us all, that we will adopt a collaborative approach. We will have a no surprises approach with everybody. And we will act in good faith with our partners. But it does not in any way take away from the accountability or responsibilities that each of us has. It just recognises that there are a lot of things we all have in common. And I don't know how long we've had these agreements, but for a very long time.
Since 2002.
2002. And have they ever caused any complications?
Just a bit of background. In 2002, there were probably the time when the relationship between territorials and regional councils was probably the most tense. And apart, there were questions about the functions of regional councils. One of the key concerns is a similar one that we had with the central decision council may make that it may impose costs on a territorial. So the key, apart from playing nicely, the key thing here is the regional council is unable to add a new function to its activity unless it consults with territorial local government. That's the actual critical part in this document. That's why the law was amended, to make sure that there was explicit processes, particularly as it related to a regional council taking on a function that may have implications for local authorities, apart from that they will. That is, can I just make one amendment to the covering report? So under the discussion, it refers to the change between the previous agreement and the current agreement. Actually, the second bullet point where it says adding the Wellington Regional Climate Change Working Group and the Wellington Regional Leadership Committee to the list of regional and sub-regional forums isn't correct. What the document actually does is lists the topics the council will work together on rather than specific forums. So 6.1 in the agreement indicates the councils will work collaboratively on such topics as regional spatial planning, transport, climate change, resilience, regional economic development, waste, and the report. Just want to be clear that there isn't actually a regional climate change working group, for instance. It's the forums the council will work across the region to have a regional view.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any comments, observations? Okay, yes, Councillor Woodcock.
Harry, when you say, thanks, Mr. Mayor, when you say regional councils have to consult with us, consulting is all great, but do we have to have an agreement with them? Or can they just consult with us and say, well, we're going to do it anyway?
Consult. Yeah, consult.
And then they'll just do it anyway.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yes, after all, just as we have some responsibilities and we may consult with our neighbours or our residents, but at the end of the day, we do have to make a decision and stand by it. Equally, the regional council has some accountabilities and it does have to make decisions, but at least this is one mechanism to make sure that they know we're in the tent, as it were. My view so far, it's not a very, not built on a very lengthy track record, but I get the feeling that the Wellington Regional Council does go out of its way to be collaborative. I know that any time I've raised an issue about something, they'll shoot somebody over the hill. I can think of a number of matters in the past that possibly affected both us and them, and often their representatives were turning up to talk to people we were. So I've got a lot of confidence that the Regional Council does take its consultative and indeed a wide range of its responsibilities to the wider community quite seriously. But obviously every now and again they'll do something that upsets us, like a guitar, for example. But I think Wellington Regional Council's consultation and engagement is at a much higher level, partly because we elect people to the regional council, so they're aware of that. Yes, thank you, Councillor Maynard.
I'm just quite intrigued and would like a little bit of clarification on what you might know with regards to this. The triennial agreement, it just says that under the treaty obligations, tangata whenua are not party to the agreement under the Act. There are no implications for tangata whenua, but if you look down, it says strategic drivers and, so this is basically just being put under as legislative requirement.
Yes, so
It has nothing to do with anything else. You don't discuss anything like climate change and all those types of things that actually do affect tangata whenua and mana whenua?
Absolutely, we do. Yeah. The law requires the councils to be the signatories, so we have to be the signatories. But I would say one of the things that does indeed impress me about Greater Wellington is they take their treaty responsibilities very, very seriously. And I'm also convinced that we are in the process of starting to uplift our responsibilities in that area at the same time. So I have no doubt that mana whenua will be widely consulted on a huge range of things that come out of the actual process itself. But legally, at this stage anyway, they are not signatories. And if they were, they'd probably then have to do stuff. So that might be the downside of that. Okay, so there appears to be no other comments. I will move that the three recommendations on page 170 be agreed to. Do I have a seconder? I do. The deputy mayor. All in favour, please say aye. Aye. And I think that would be a good time to stop. Anybody disagree?
Colin?
This is a wrap, I won't.
It's going to be a long 3 years.
We will come back at 1 o'clock. Yes, the caterers for councillor of special dietary requirements and